All right, chapter 3, section 3. This is the last lesson before your quiz on Tuesday, September 24th. You guys have multiple reviews on Canvas. Please complete them. There is one that is homework. You don't get to all the questions, that's fine, but at least do a majority of them. Do the ones that are repeated. So you got to at least practice all the concepts. All right, proving lines are parallel. Before I go ahead, we are proving lines are parallel. For 3-2, we proved that angles were congruent. So you will see vocabulary words in this lesson from chapter 2. Okay. Looking at this one, this is called corresponding angles converse theorem. We covered converse. We covered conditional, converse, inverse, contrapositive. Converse means what? What happens? What is converse? Okay, conditional was your original statement. Converse was your statement. Good, flipped. So, again, last lesson we covered, they gave us parallel lines. We had to find that my angles were congruent. So if my lines were parallel, then my angles were congruent or supplementary. However, now we're doing the reverse. So because it specifically says converse, once this pen decides to work. Okay, converse, now it works. Converse is you're flipping it. Okay, flip. Oops, forgot my L. Flip the if and then. Okay, so that's what converse is. You're flipping the if and then. So again, last lesson, corresponding angles congruent theorem. For that we said, if the lines were parallel, then the two lines cut by the transversal, the corresponding angles were congruent. Okay, so they already gave me that if my lines were parallel. Is there anywhere in this image that they're showing me my lines are parallel? Do we see the little arrows? No. So these lines we're assuming are not parallel. They want us to show them that they're parallel. So again, if two lines are cut by a transversal and corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So that is showing me or telling me that my lines are going to be parallel. So if I were to write this, it would be written as if angle 2 is congruent to angle 6, then J is parallel to K. That's how it would be written. Okay, so this is a converse of what we learned yesterday. We are just flipping the if and the then. All right. Alternate interior angles converse. Same thing, we are still dealing with the converse. We are flipping it. So, key thing here. If two lines are cut by a transversal, alternate interior angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So how would this look if I had to draw it? Okay, again, we're working with alternate interior angles. I'm going to go ahead and draw my alternate interior angles. Here is my transversal. Here are two lines that are cutting my transversal. And let's name the angles 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's name this line P and line Q. Who could tell me what are my, or give me a pair of alternate interior angles? Who could give me a pair of alternate interior angles? Yes, Camilla? Say it one more time. Good. 3 and 5 are alternate interior angles. They are congruent. So with 3 and 5 being congruent, I could now write if angle 3 is congruent to angle 5, then line P is parallel to line Q. Remember, if this happens, then they are parallel. They're not showing me those little arrows on my lines, but if they're congruent, then they are parallel. So looking at the next one, I have alternate exterior angles converse. And this one says, if two lines are cut by a transversal and the alternate exterior angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So using the same diagram that I drew, who could give me one pair of alternate exterior angles? One pair of alternate exterior angles. Go ahead.
Angle 1.
Okay, angle 1 and angle 7 are alternate exterior angles. So again, if I had to write this one, I would write it as angle 1 if angle 1 and angle 7, or I forgot my congruency mark, if angle 1 is congruent to angle 7, then P is parallel to Q. So we're still using the vocabulary from yesterday. We did corresponding angles, meaning angles in the same position according to my two lines that cut my transversal. We're dealing with alternate interior, alternate exterior. And the last one we're going to work with is consecutive interior. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, consecutive interior angles. When I'm looking at consecutive interior angles, we should know what consecutive interior angles are. Are consecutive interior angles congruent? No, consecutive interior angles are going to be supplementary. So it says if two lines are cut by a transversal, so the consecutive interior angles are supplementary, then the lines are parallel. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this one out. Same thing so you can see it as a diagram. This is my transversal. It's being cut, let me make those a little diagonal. Cut by two lines. Again, I don't know if they're parallel. However, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Can someone tell me which two pairs of angles are my consecutive interior angles? Consecutive angles. Which ones are my consecutive interior angles? Yes.
3 and 5.
Good, 3 and 5. Am I going to draw congruency marks? No, they are not congruent, so I'm just going to give you some measurements. Let's say this one was 110 and this one was 70. Keep in mind, they're always the two, I wouldn't say adjacent because they're not really next to each other. They're the two on the same side of the transversal on the interior of my two lines. So I'm going to highlight it so that kind of makes more sense. Right here. My interior on the same side of my transversal, that is my consecutive angles. Also, 4 and 6 would also be consecutive interior angles. I should actually switch these two because why does this one look like it's smaller? So I'm going to switch this and make it 70 and 110 over here. That looks better. All right, keep in mind, angle 4 would be 110, and angle 6 could be 70, and 4 and 6 would also be considered consecutive interior. So, how would I write this as a statement? I would write it as if angle 3 and angle 5 are supplementary, then, let's name our lines. We'll say M and N. Line M is parallel to line, not M, N. Okay, so this is what it would look like if I'm using consecutive interior angles converse. Remember, we are proving that my lines are parallel. So if they're supplementary, then my lines are parallel. All right, another theorem, we have transitive property of parallel lines. Can someone tell me, what does transitive mean? We covered this in chapter 2. Again, we are still using vocabulary from chapters 1 and 2 for chapter 3, so you have to study the vocabulary. Can somebody tell me what transitive means? Any ideas? We covered reflexive, symmetric, and transitive. Which one was the transitive? Jonah?
The syllogism.
The law of syllogism one, I'm getting rid of that overlap, so pay attention to this. We're talking specifically about parallel lines. Transitive property of parallel lines. If two lines are parallel to this same line, then they are parallel to each other. So we have to have some sort of overlap. So we're going to have 3 lines cutting my transversal, and I'm going to draw it. Here's my transversal. And it's being cut by 3 lines. Why 3? I'm going to show you why. I have line J, line K, and line L. So how would I write this? If J is parallel to K and K is parallel to L, then what? What would I say? What would be parallel to what? If 2 lines are parallel to the same line, so looking at it, if 2 lines, if J and L are parallel to K, they're both parallel to the same, then they are parallel to each other. Yes, go ahead, Bailey. Then J is parallel to L. Good. Okay, so again, I'm going to repeat it. If 2 lines are parallel to the same line, so my 2 lines, I'll show you my 2 lines. Okay, we'll say those 2 lines, I have a purple and a blue. If 2 lines are parallel, I'll split them up. So I have these 2 lines. If 2 lines are parallel to the same line, here's my same line, then they are parallel to each other. The J is going to be parallel to L, just following along to what's parallel to each other. Those 2 lines are going to be parallel to each other if they're parallel to the same line. So yes, like law of syllogism, you're getting rid of that overlap. That is what transitive means. You're blending them together. They're going to be parallel to each other. They are parallel to each other. Questions on transitive property. We have dealt with transitive before. Ways to prove 2 lines are parallel. So this is kind of a summing up what we did, just without the theorem names. So looking at these, what did we cover? Ways to prove 2 lines are parallel. Show that pair of corresponding angles are congruent. So we should know what corresponding angles are. If they're congruent, my lines are parallel. Show that a pair of alternate interior or exterior angles are congruent. So again, if they're congruent, then my lines are parallel. Show that a pair of consecutive interior angles are supplementary. Keep in mind, they are not congruent, they must be supplementary. Then my lines are going to be parallel. And the last one, show that both lines are parallel to the third. Okay, so both of my lines are parallel to my third, then my lines are supplementary. So those key things for you to remember. Keep in mind they're not telling you the theorem name. They're kind of giving you the definition of the theorems. Looking at example 1, it says which segments are parallel. Can anybody tell me which segments do they think are parallel? And how do you know? So looking at this, which segments are parallel and how do you know? Sophia, go ahead. How would they be parallel? Okay, if they're corresponding angles, let's just say this right here is my transversal. So I'm just going to label it. If I were to look at it and say BF and AD are parallel, what do they have to be in order to be parallel? Remember, what do the angles have to be in order for me to prove that the angles are parallel or the lines are parallel? So are these angles congruent? No, so those wouldn't be parallel. Let's try a different one. Katya? Okay, so looking at it, AC and EB, what do those angles equal? 60 and 60. Okay, so if they're both 60, will they make my lines parallel? Yeah. Okay, so when I say my lines, I'm talking about AC and BE. They're my segments. So AC is parallel to BE. Yes. How do I know? By what? By what? They're both 60 degrees, but yes, definition-wise, what would those angles be called? Yeah. Good. These would be corresponding angles, converse theorem. Example number 2, what value of x makes AB parallel to CD? Katya? Okay, how would I know it's 50? If they're telling me AB is parallel to CD, here's my transversal. Okay, what do I know? Good, if AB is a right angle, if segment AB is a right angle to my transversal and CD makes a right angle, what would x equal? Okay, so I would do 90 minus 40 because they're 90-degree angle. I would get 50, so this would be 50 degrees. How do I know that those are both right angles? Yes, they're telling me my lines are parallel. What am I using? So what am I using? What are those angles? Yeah. They're not consecutive because remember, consecutive is interior. Are both of these angles interior? No, wouldn't be consecutive. Jonah? Good. These would be corresponding angles. So I know if corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. Okay, so because they're already telling me my lines are parallel, I know they're going to be congruent. So if one is 90 degrees, the other one must also be 90 degrees. And then I can go ahead and solve for my x. So information that we have to know. God bless you. All right, example number 3, it says find the value of x and y that makes J parallel to K and L parallel to T. They're giving me one angle 60 degrees, one angle's 3x, and one's 2y. What do I know is congruent and how? Yes.
60, yeah, 60 degrees is congruent to 3x by the corresponding.
Good. So these two, keep in mind there are 4 transversals here. However, for this one, I am using line L as my transversal, so I'm just going to go ahead and highlight it so you can see which one I'm using and label. This is my transversal that I'm using for my purple side. So what did we say we used? Corresponding, right? So we used corresponding angles. So 3x equals 60. Solving for x, what does x equal? Good. So x is 20 degrees. Now I'm going to go ahead and look for 2y. What is 2y equal to? Yeah.
2y is equal to angle 60 by the alternate interior.
Good. So for this one, I am now looking at line, what is that? J as my transversal. Okay, so this is now my transversal for the next one. And we said we were using alternate interior angles. So 2y equals 60. Divide both sides by 2. What does y equal? Good. Okay, so understand that when you are given a diagram with multiple transversals, you have to know which one's going with which. Okay, so you can look at this multiple different ways. You will be given a question like this. You will see it on your test or your quiz. Just understand when you are looking at different transversals in different areas and matching specific things, certain things are congruent to others. So please make sure you are understanding where your transversal is and how you are going to use it. All right, looking at example number 4, it says, how can you tell whether the sides of the pattern are parallel in the photo of the diamondback snake? So looking at the pattern, they're kind of giving you the diagram. I know it's a little hard to see, but looking at it, you see you have a transversal and 2 well, we don't know if they're parallel. We see congruent symbols, so I'll just make this, I'll trace it over in yellow. Hopefully you could see it. Let me use a little thicker one. This is what the diagram looks like for those of you who can't really see it because it is very faint. So looking at it, how can I tell that this pattern, that the sides of the patterns are parallel? How could I tell? Callie? Good. So if alternate interior angles are parallel, or sorry, not parallel, are congruent, then the lines are parallel. I'll just do my parallel symbol. Okay, and again, how do I know that they're congruent? Because they're giving me these congruency marks. They're congruent by the marks. These little congruency marks right here are telling me that it is congruent. Okay, questions on this one? All right, you guys have a lot of reviews. I want to say 3 reviews, 1 Quizlet on Canvas. Please study those for your quiz on Tuesday. 3.1 homework is also up on Big Ideas. Don't forget to read the description. There are a few questions that you do not have to show work for, But for, I believe, 10, 11, and 12, you have to write out the proof in your own writing, not a screenshot. Please write it out.